Our main speaker and who put this all together for us is Steve DeLotte, an attorney with Myers, Roman, Friedman, and Lewis. He is a trial lawyer defending businesses in all types of general commercial disputes and business torts. He's a certified specialist in Ohio workers' compensation law. He spent 11 years as an assistant attorney general representing several state agencies, including the Ohio State Pharmacy Board, the Ohio State Medical Board, the Department of Health, and the Bureau of Records. I'm done. And the one last thing, I don't know what this means exactly, but he was named as an Ohio super lawyer for 2010, 11, 12, and 13. I don't know what that means, but it sounds pretty good.
That's good for now, yeah.
Okay, that's it.
All right.
Thank you. Let me get out of here. Wait.
Good morning, everyone. Just a few brief remarks before we start to set the groundwork here. Kathy thought it would be very helpful, I think based on Lisa's suggestion, that we produce or present a mock hearing. I don't know how many of you have been to an industrial commission hearing. Just so you understand, logistically, the way that it's set up now is not actually how it's set up in the hearing room. Not that it makes a difference, but it's much smaller. We're all at one table. The injured worker and their attorney are on one side. The employer's attorney, if they have one, and the employer representative are on the other side. And then at the end, at the head, sort of on a raised dais, is the hearing officer like Mr. Bartko. But, you know, for practical purposes, obviously, it's going to be easier for us to talk directly out to the audience, so we set it up like this. Just to give you a little background in terms of the facts of this case, and then we'll get into it. This is a individual, a housekeeping aide who worked at a nursing home, and what she claimed was she tripped on a call cord. So what I have here is a picture of the room. You can see the call cord coming out from the wall and threaded down, and then it gets tied around the handrail here. Those of you who work in nursing homes are familiar with this. It gets tied around here, and she's claiming that she tripped on the call cord and fell, injured her right knee, and we'll take it from there. So the hearing commences with Mr. Bartko.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Bartko. I'll be the hearing officer here today. We're here today on your application for benefits that was filed back in August over an alleged date of injury back on July 9th. I'm just going to turn the floor over to Mr. Lubin, and we'll start from there.
Thanks again. So, Mrs. Thomas, where are you currently employed?
Nursing home.
And how long have you been employed?
About 6 years.
And what is your job?
I am a housekeeping assistant.
What does that entail?
Well, I clean the residents' rooms, I clean the common areas, the hallways, the lunchroom. I do a lot of cleaning.
Okay. Why don't you tell the hearing officer what happened on July 9th?
Okay. I was wiping down the headboard in a resident's room, and I was standing between the nightstand, which is about 2 feet from the bed, and the bed. I finished wiping it down, and as I turned to leave, my right foot got caught in the call cord, which comes from the wall. I fell to the ground on my right knee and then kind of bounced off my knee and landed on my behind.
And did you feel pain in your right knee?
Yes, I did, immediately.
What did you do next?
Well, I tried to get up, but I couldn't. And right as I was trying to get up but was unable to, Ursula, one of my coworkers, was running into the room. And I guess she was in the next room, and as she was coming in, she said that she had heard a loud thump. She asked me if I was okay, and I told her that my knee really was hurting. And she encouraged me to get up slowly, and she was trying to help me. We walked to the nurse's station where I sat down, and she brought me ice for my knee.
Okay, and what happened next?
Well, then I had my supervisor, Barb Bivens, paged. And she came about 10 minutes later. She asked me what happened, and I told her that I was cleaning the resident, his name was Joe. I was cleaning his room, and I told her that I tripped on the call cord and fell onto my knee.
Okay, and did she ask you to fill out paperwork?
She did. She asked me to fill out an incident report, which I did at that time.
Mrs. Thomas, I'm going to show you a copy of the incident report you filled out. Is that your handwriting there?
Yes, it is, all except for the part at the bottom. I think that Barb filled that out.
Okay, and did you know she filled that portion out on the bottom?
No, she must have done it after I filled out my part.
Okay. So walk me through what happened next.
Well, I sat at the nurse's station for a little while, and Barb asked me if I thought I was able to finish my shift. I said that I would try, and then I went to the lunchroom to wipe down the chairs, but my right knee was hurting pretty badly. I had Barb paged again and told her that I was not going to be able to finish my shift and that I was going to go home.
And did you go home?
Yes, I went home, and I waited for a few hours for my husband to come home from work, and when he got home, we went to the hospital.
And walk me through what happened at the hospital.
Well, a doctor saw me, they took x-rays, and they told me that I broke my kneecap. They also put me in a mobilizer for my right knee, and they gave me crutches.
And did you tell the hospital staff that you tripped at work on a call cord?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Were you off work after that?
Yes, the hospital doctor took me off work and told me to follow up with my own family doctor. A few days later, I went to see Dr. Kellis.
Okay, and what did Dr. Kellis do?
Well, he told me not to wear the knee immobilizer. He said that it slows the recovery. He ordered an MRI, and the MRI showed a meniscal tear in my right knee.
And did he take you off of work?
Well, he put me on light duty, but doesn't have light duty.
Okay, did you eventually go back to work?
Yes. I did some physical therapy, and I was off for about 2 months, and then I returned to work full duty October 1st.
Did you have surgery?
No, I haven't had it yet. Dr. Kellis told me that I have to wait until after the claim is approved before the BWC will pay for it.
Okay. And apparently you had a couple of bruises around your right knee before this, is that right?
That is right, yes. On July 4th, which was a couple days before the injury, I was at my daughter's house and I fell as I was going out the front door steps. I fell backward, and while getting up, I scraped my right shin below the knee on a cement planter that she had there. I also had a bruise above my knee, the same right knee, from hitting it on a wheelchair, but that all happened a few days earlier.
One second, just so you understand, because these facts flow very quickly and I want to make sure you're following what's happening. On July 9th, that was a Monday afternoon, that's when Bobby said that she fell and hurt her knee. July 4th, which was the previous Wednesday night, was what she just testified to when she was at the daughter's house and she fell going out the back stairs, and that's where she sustained the bruise below the right knee. So chronologically, that's important for us as the nursing home, the employer, when we're going to be contesting the claim. Go on.
And what day of the week was July 4th?
That was a Wednesday night.
Very good. Did you get medical treatment for that?
No, I didn't. It was not a bother at all. In fact, I worked the next day, which was Thursday, and I worked all day Friday.
And did you have any problem doing your job?
No, I did not. None at all.
The work fall happened the following Monday afternoon. Did you work all day on Monday without any problem?
Yes, up to the point where I fell. After I fell at work, then I was not able to complete my shift.
And have you ever had any problems with your right knee before the fall on July 9th?
No, never. I never saw a doctor for it or had any problems until after that day when I fell.
No more questions.
Mr. Allat, questions?
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, let's talk about this call cord. Thank you. Ms. Thomas, let's talk about this call cord a minute. You tripped on the call cord, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and when that happened, that has happened before, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and when that has happened before, that call cord has come out of the wall, is that correct?
Sometimes it has, but not always.
Okay, well, in those previous times when the call cord has come, or let's say any of those times when you've tripped on the call cord, have you ever actually fallen on the floor?
No, I haven't.
Okay, and where was the call cord exactly when you fell?
It was wrapped around my right ankle.
Okay, and that's what caused you to fall, getting caught?
Yes, it is.
With it around your right ankle?
Yes.
Okay. There were no witnesses to this, is that correct?
Well, Ursula heard the loud thud when I fell, and she came running into the room.
Okay, but no one actually saw you fall, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, isn't it true when Barb, your supervisor, got there, you told her you don't know what caused your fall?
No, that's definitely not true.
Okay. You're sure of that?
I'm sure of that.
Okay. Ms. Thomas, you have a limp, is that correct?
Yes?
And that's on the right side, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And this limp has been going on for a while, long before the work incident on July 9th, is that correct?
Yes, but that's from my sciatica that goes from my low back down my right leg, and that has nothing to do with my right knee.
Did you tell Dr. Cullis when you saw him at any time that you had this limp on your right side?
No, because it doesn't have anything to do with my right knee.
All right. Dr. Cullis says that your fall caused you to start limping. That's incorrect. Is that right? Because you were limping long before this incident.
Yes, I was, but the limp after the fall was so much worse. I could hardly stand.
Did you tell Dr. Cullis about this July 4th fall when you bumped your right shin?
Yes, I did.
Are you sure of that? Because I went through his medical records and I see no mention anywhere about a July 4th fall.
Well, I told him. I don't know why it's not in his record.
Ms. Thomas, you've seen Dr. Cullis before for other workers' comp claims, have you not?
Well, I saw him a couple of years ago, maybe in 2005, for a couple of visits when I slipped on water at work and I twisted my back.
And that was at another job, is that correct?
Yes, I worked at a restaurant.
Okay. I'm looking at Dr. Cullis's medical records, and this is for this earlier claim. It looks like you saw him about 11 times for that. Does that sound right?
That sounds like a lot, but it was a while ago, and it was for my right hip. So, again, it doesn't have anything to do with my right knee.
You don't have medical insurance, do you?
No, I do not.
Okay. And a couple final questions, which you're not prepared for.
Okay.
But I got to throw it in. When you fell on July 9th, you said that you smacked your knee against the floor, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did you have swelling as a result of that?
Yes, I had swelling. Yes, it was awful. I could hardly stand.
And I presume that hitting your knee against the floor obviously would cause that swelling to be very significant, correct?
Yes, my knee really hurt. It was very swollen.
So when you got to the hospital, at that point, your knee had already swelled up pretty bad?
Yes. it
Okay.
had.
And in addition to that, did you also bruise your knee as a result of that fall?
Yes, I did. And it was a different bruise from when I fell at my daughter's house.
Okay. But in any event, you did sustain a bruise as a result of that.
Yes.
You're sure of that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking at the medical records for your initial treatment at the hospital, and it specifically says under the box or section of swelling that there's no swelling whatsoever. Do you have any explanation for that?
My knee was swollen and I had the bruises. I can't help what the emergency room people are doing. And I think there was a heart attack victim or somebody next to me. And so, they were really worried about that person.
In addition to that, there's no indication in the medical records in that initial visit of any bruising.
Again, I can't help what they wrote down.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Follow-up questions, Mr. Lewin?
Yes, please. Mrs. Thomas, again, you had no problems with your right knee after July 4th, correct?
That is correct.
It was only after the July 9th fall that you couldn't work because of the right knee pain. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
That's all the questions I have.
Off script, real quick. Is Dr. Kellis your family doctor?
Dr. Kellis is not my family doctor. I went to him for my knee.
Okay, so if you had a family doctor, you would tell me his name.
I would.
Jones.
Okay.
I would ask you when's the last time you saw him for any medical problem,
You know what? It's been a long time. I can't recall.
but you've never seen him for your knee.
No, I haven't.
She saw Dr. Takis about, I understand that. She saw Dr. Takis about 6 months earlier for the sciatica and the pain going down the right side. but there was no indication in those records of any treatment for the right knee.
I hate it when people have records I don't have. I always ask for all the medical records in advance. So Mr. Lott and I are going to have a talk after this hearing.
If this were a real hearing, he would have the
Additional questions.
if this were a real hearing, he'd have the records. Okay.
Mr. Lott, questions for your witness?
Thank you. Ms. Bivens, are you employed?
Yes,
And what's your position there?
I am the supervisor of housekeeping and laundry services
How long have you been employed?
since 1990.
What are your duties and responsibilities?
I oversee the housekeeping staff. I also spend about half my time doing housekeeping duties as well as assisting my staff.
And I want to bring your attention to July 9, 2012. You recall that day?
Yes.
Please tell the hearing officer what you recall.
I had just returned to my office when I got a call that Bobby had hurt herself and was at the nurse's station. I went up to the nurse's station and saw Bobby sitting there with her right knee elevated and ice on it. I asked her what happened. She said she was cleaning a room, and the next thing she knew, she was on the floor. So I went to the room to investigate. I was trying to figure out if I could see anything amiss or understand what caused Bobby to fall. I saw nothing out of the ordinary in the room. I went back to Bobby. I noticed 2 bruises on her right knee, one below and one above the knee. I asked her what had happened. She said the bruise below the knee was from a fall on some steps on July 4th, and the bruise above the knee was from a wheelchair.
What happened next?
I've tripped on the call cord a couple times myself, thinking that maybe this is what caused her fall. I asked her, could you have tripped on the call cord?
And what did she say?
She said possibly.
What did you do next?
I told her to fill out an incident report, which she did.
Let me show you that. And is that your handwriting on the bottom?
Yes, it is.
Why did you put that there?
I had never been in a situation like this before where someone was hurt and didn't know how they fell and had some bruises in that same area, so I felt like I needed to document that.
Okay. Are you able to read that? Can you read that?
Stated the previous bruises on right leg, shin, and above kneecap were from fall last week, July 4th, 2012.
Okay, thank you. Did you document that July 4th fall anywhere else?
Yes, I also typed up a short statement as well that day.
Okay. Let me show you that statement. Is that the statement that you filled out?
It is.
Okay. And why don't you quickly read that?
On July 9, 2012, when speaking with Bobby on how quick an accident can happen, she stated she knows that she had fallen on the 4th of July, showing me her elbow, which had a quarter-sized scab along with a half-dollar-sized bruise on the shin of her right knee, both a result from her 4th of July fall. She had a small bruise above her right knee, which she stated was from a wheelchair.
Thank you. What happened next with Bobby?
Well, I asked her if she thought she could continue working, and she said she would try.
As I understand it, she did not finish her shift.
Correct. I got a call from her a little later, and she said she was in too much pain and she couldn't finish her shift and she had to leave.
Did you have any more communication with her after that?
She did bring in a doctor's slip putting her on light duty, but we don't have light duty here, so she couldn't come back yet.
Did she eventually did come back to work, is that right?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about the July 4th fall. Bobby came to work the next day, July 5th. That was a Thursday, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall noticing anything unusual at all that day?
I did pass by the locker room that morning and noticed she was out of sorts. I asked her if she was okay, and she said yes.
Now, Ms. Thomas has testified to a limp she's had for a while. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I've seen her limp before. I asked her if she was okay. She said she had sciatica.
One last thing, Ms. Bivens. Let's just talk about that call cord a minute. You said you've tripped on the call cord. Is that right?
Yes.
Has the cord always come out of the wall when that's happened?
Yes, always.
And that's true even though you've never actually fallen on the floor.
That's true. It's always come out of the wall.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Mr. Lubin, questions?
Miss Bivens, you testified that Bobby looked out of sorts on July 5th, correct?
Yes.
But Mrs. Thomas worked the entire day on July 5th with no problems, correct?
Yes, not that I'm aware of.
And Miss Thomas worked the entire day on Friday, July 6th with no problems, correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Thomas worked all day the following Monday with no problems, correct?
Yes.
Now, I'm looking at the incident report here that Ms. Thomas filled out, and your statement on there about her bruises from the July 4th fall, correct?
Yes.
I'm also looking at the typed statement you prepared that also mentions about the July 4th fall and the wheelchair bruise. I see nowhere on there any mention about your testimony that Bobby had no idea what caused her to fall. Is that correct?
Yes, it's not there.
And you filled out this incident report and wrote the statement out that same day Bobby hurt herself, but now 4 months later, you're mentioning for the first time about Bobby claiming she didn't know what caused her fall, correct?
Yes.
You didn't think it was important enough to put that information down in the incident report?
Well, in retrospect, I should have, but I guess I was concentrating on the bruises.
And Bobby was honest with you when she told you about the July 4th fall, correct? She didn't try to lie or hide that information from you, correct?
That is correct.
That's all the questions I have.
Ms. Bivens, is there any doubt in your mind as you sit here today that on July 9th, Bobby told you she didn't know how she fell?
No.
No doubt whatsoever.
No.
Okay, that's all the questions that I have.
Mr. Lippman, would you like to present your legal argument?
Of course, thank you. Mr. Barco, this is about as straightforward a claim as possible. Mrs. Thomas trips on the call cord at work and hurts her right knee. A nurse's aide hears the loud thump and comes running in to help her. You have the statement from the nurse's aide substantiating this. Bobby and Ursula go to the nurse's station. Mrs. Thomas pages her supervisor, and when she gets there, tells her supervisor what had happened. She fills out the incident report describing what happens, tries to finish her shift, but cannot. She goes to the hospital later that same day, tells the hospital exactly what she puts in her incident report. Quote, "I tripped on the call cord at work and fell on my right knee." The hospital takes her off work. She follows up with Dr. Kellis a few days later. She tells Dr. Kellis what had happened at work, the same description that she put on the incident report and that she had told the hospital. Dr. Kellis orders an MRI, which shows a meniscal tear. The employer has presented no evidence, because none exists, of any prior problems or treatment to Mrs. Thomas's right knee. This whole story about the July 4th fall is a red herring by the employer as an excuse to get the claim denied. First, Bobby was entirely honest with Ms. Bivens when she asked about the bruise on her shin. She told her she bruised it on July 4th. That shows her honesty. Second, she worked the next day, July 5th, the day after that, July 6th, and then the following Monday with no problems. No sign or indication of any right knee problems until the fall on Monday afternoon. Her story has been consistent throughout. We ask that this claim be allowed for a right knee sprain and a right knee meniscal tear.
Mr. Delat?
Thank you, Mr. Barco. Mr. Barco, let me just start with looking closely at the mechanism of injury. You have a situation where the injured worker is claiming that she tripped over she tripped over the call cord as she turned to leave the room. And I would submit to you, Mr. Barco, first of all, as you've heard, both Ms. Thomas and Ms. Bivens have tripped on the call cord before. In every situation that's occurred, the call cord has always come out of the wall. In this situation, and they have not actually fallen to the floor. In this situation, you have a set of facts where the call cord gets wrapped around Ms. Thomas's right ankle. The force of that causes her to fall down and strike her knee against the floor. She bounces off the floor. She lands on her behind, and yet all of that does not cause the call cord to come out of the wall. I submit to you, Mr. Barco, that is physically not possible. Second of all, As far as the bruising and the fact that Ms. Thomas was very open and honest with Ms. Bivens, her supervisor, when Ms. Bivens asked her what happened, just to set that scene up a minute, Ms. Thomas is sitting there icing her knee. Ms. Bivens notices the bruises both below the knee and above the knee. So it's not exactly a situation where Ms. Thomas was open and honest about the fact that, and volunteered this information about the fact that she had these bruises on her knee. Ms. Bivens saw these bruises, and she specifically asked her about how she sustained those bruises. Third of all, as you heard Ms. Thomas testify, she smacks her knee so hard against the floor that a woman in the next room, a coworker, Ursula, hears this thud and comes running into the next room to see what happened. And yet, despite Ms. Thomas saying that her knee swelled up and it looked terrible when she got to the hospital, there was no bruising according to the medical records, and there was no swelling whatsoever. And this is a woman who is not someone who doesn't swell or bruise easily. Again, Mr. Barco, you have the July 4th fall that showed a bruise 5 days later, a $half size bruise below Ms. Thomas's knee, and you have the wheelchair bruise, which clearly had to have happened before that Monday. So at least several days had gone by the time that bruise was apparent. And yet, you have this situation where she strikes the knee against the floor so hard, no swelling, no bruising whatsoever. I submit to you as well that that is not physically possible. And finally, as you heard, Ms. Bivens had questioned Ms. Thomas at the time. And according to Ms. Bivens, Ms. Thomas told her, "I don't know how I fell. I was cleaning the headboard, and the next thing I know, I'm on the ground." Ms. Bivens has no secondary gain in all of this versus Ms. Thomas, who clearly has a secondary gain in wanting to get this workers' compensation claim allowed. Ms. Thomas has no medical insurance. She has no opportunity to get her knee treated if, in fact, it was the July 4th fall that caused these problems. We believe that after considering all of the evidence, that you will find that Ms. Thomas did not sustain an injury in the course of and arising out of her employment.
Rebuttal, Mr. Lubin.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Ma'am, what's going to happen now is I'm going to take this under advisement. Let me go through all the records in your file one more time. You'll get a couple yellow sheets of paper with my name on it, probably by the end of the week, that just says, this is what I did and this is why I did it. At the bottom of the order, it's going to say either party has 14 days from the time they get my order to appeal it. Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about this a little bit. This is an actual case. I think it's pretty obvious to you that it was an actual case. And I represented the nursing home. We had a tough case. And in fact, I'll tell you that we lost at the Industrial Commission. And again, part of the problem in these situations is, which you don't get a full flavor of, and the hearing officer doesn't always get a full flavor of, is the fact that there have been some problems with Ms. Thomas before, some disciplinary issues. Again, nothing significant. It's just that she's had some write-ups, and that, when Barb Bivens confronts her at the time, and that, of course, is disputed as to whether or not, Barb Bivens says that Ms. Thomas said, "I don't know how I fell." Ms. Thomas said, "I told her that I tripped on the call cord." So again, from Ms. Bivens' standpoint as her supervisor, she's had a history somewhat with Ms. Thomas, so she's already a little skeptical as to the truth of that. That can't always be communicated to a hearing officer, and frankly, and I'll let Mr. Barco talk when I'm done, and frankly, even when it is communicated, sometimes it just looks like you're slinging mud against the wall. It's always a fine line, as I think as a defense attorney, when you want to try to create the context for what something on the surface may appear to be pretty straightforward, that there are nuances. Maybe there's a prior history. Maybe, those are the issues or the concerns that the employer has about this particular employee, and we may not always be able to successfully convey that context to the hearing officer because, again, sometimes it just does look like you're throwing mud against the wall. That's not to say that I would stay away from the disciplinary history. In this case, it wasn't that significant that I felt it would make that much of a difference, but I certainly bring it up when there are more serious write-ups because, after all, credibility is the issue in this situation. Who do you believe? Do you believe Ms. Thomas, the injured worker, or do you believe Ms. Bivens, who's the supervisor? A couple of other points to make as well. You have to understand that, when we get to a hearing, in a court case, there's discovery. So we've taken the injured worker's deposition. Whoever there will be witnesses at the trial, their deposition will have been taken. We know when we get to trial what the facts of the case are. We're prepared. When you get to a hearing, yes, you have some documents in front of you, but you don't know, because I've never had an opportunity to question Ms. Thomas before the hearing. I'm hearing what she says for the first time at the hearing. And when she says to me, I told Barb Bivens what happened, that can catch me off guard. Because again, Barb Bivens is telling me that Ms. Thomas told her, I don't know how I fell. I was cleaning and then I landed on the ground. So all of a sudden, I'm hearing for the first time Ms. Thomas is denying that she ever said that. She's saying, I told her straight out, this is what happened. So I've got to pivot a little bit and try to anticipate that and follow up with a question or two. But again, the point is that happens at first hearings, especially because you're sort of feeling each other out. You're getting an idea of what the other side is saying, and you're hearing testimony, you're hearing facts for the first time from the other side that you won't have heard before, the same way that the injured workers attorney is hearing testimony from my witness that they don't know before. And I guarantee you that Mr. Lubin didn't know beforehand that Ms. Bivens is going to say that she told me she didn't know how she fell. She just landed on the ground. The other difficulty for us in this situation is there's about 3 or 4 points to focus on, in the injured worker's favor that I think hearing officers look for, and I certainly know that makes our case difficult. One is that there is no prior history of treatment to the right knee. That's always potentially harmful to the employer when they're trying to claim that this was an alleged injury and they didn't actually hurt themselves at work. Clearly, Ms. Thomas hurt her knee. She gets medical treatment later in the day. She's diagnosed with a tibia fracture. So then the question becomes for the employer, well, if she didn't hurt it at work, where did she hurt it? Our comeback to that was, and this is why the nursing home fought it, we believe that the July 4th incident where she sustained that bruise below the knee that was still apparent 5 days later is what caused her knee problems. Their comeback to that was that, if you picked up on it, she worked, and that was a Wednesday night, the July 4th fall. She worked Thursday with no problem. She worked Friday with no problem. She worked Monday until the incident with no problem. Again, so from a purely impartial standpoint, that's going to present a problem for the nursing home in fighting this claim. The other point to make is that, and this is a takeaway, especially in a situation like this, where the facts are difficult for the employer, is that, as you heard Mr. Lubin, when he cross-examined Ms. Bivens, she put these statements out. I mean, the important thing is that she did note that right away on the bottom of the incident report, that number 1 about the July 4th fall. And as you heard, she also prepared a written statement afterwards. Just a pet peeve of mine, to digress a minute, I see this all the time. I don't understand why witnesses do not date these things. And I see this very often. I'm sure Mr. Barco can talk about that when I let him in a minute. But but this is something that comes up surprisingly enough fairly often. And the reason it can be important is because we want to know when she wrote this statement out. Now, Ms. Bivens testified it was that day, and we're going to take her word for it. But, sometimes that doesn't always happen. A statement can be prepared 2 or 3 months later, and then all of a sudden, facts aren't in there that should be in there, and the date when that statement is made can sometimes be in dispute. So again, that's one takeaway from this, just date it. The other point is, and this is really the critical point, and I think the critical hole for us, or problem for us as the employer, is that Ms. Bivens did not put in there, as you heard, the fact that when Ms. Thomas said, when she asked her how she fell or what happened, that Ms. Thomas said, I don't know, I was cleaning the room, and the next thing I knew, I landed on the ground. Now, again, that is a hugely significant point. And if I'm the plaintiff's or injured worker's attorney, you better believe that when I'm cross-examining Ms. Bivens, as you heard, and in my closing argument to Mr. Bartko, I'm going to be all over that. Why wouldn't you put something as significant as the fact that she didn't know how she fell in your witness statement? And these are the kinds of things that employers confront too often, in my opinion, where important information is left out of the statement. Now, again, it's self-serving of me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyhow. I think that when you have a credibility situation like this, it's very helpful to bring the attorney in as early as possible. Because what I do is, even that same day, I'm going to talk to Ms. Bivens, and I'm going to go through the facts with her, and I'm going to make sure that her witness statement says everything that it needs to say that's critical, that again, when we use it later, that's complete and thorough and doesn't have any gaps. My experience, again, with most employers is that they don't necessarily know or think that far ahead or don't appreciate the significance of certain facts. In this case, again, Ms. Bivens said she was just focused on the July 4th fall bruises. In her mind, that's what stood out. But as I said, there's another very critical statement she could have added that would have been very helpful to us. And two more points about this. One is in terms of the strength of the injured workers case. One thing that a hearing officer looks for, and I look for when I'm reviewing it, is when they describe what happened, the mechanism of injury, are they consistent throughout? Because we see this in certain cases where they change their story or they don't document their story initially. In this case, Ms. Thomas was consistent throughout because immediately afterwards, she puts on that incident report, I tripped on the call cord at work. She goes to the hospital and she fills out paperwork at the hospital. She tells the hospital what happened, and she fills out a first report of injury. In the first report of injury, she says in here she was cleaning the headboard. She went to finish cleaning. The call cord caught her right knee and she fell. Again, and then she sees Dr. Cullis a few days later. She tells Dr. Cullis this is what happened. So you can imagine, from the defense perspective, defending the nursing home, that's going to be a difficult case when you have the injured worker being consistent, and yet we're trying to claim that she didn't know how she fell. We can't even document that anywhere. And I think the other problem for us, frankly, was that it seemed kind of far-fetched, and this was my reaction when I first got involved in the case, that Barb Bivens, her supervisor, is going to suggest to her, well, could you have tripped on the call cord? That just seems, to me, it strikes someone, an impartial hearing officer or someone just looking at this impartially, as a little odd that she would put it in her head. What's difficult to convey to you is that if you knew the personalities involved, it wouldn't seem as crazy as it is. But that's the hurdle that we face as defense attorneys, trying to convey that to the hearing officer. And the final point, too, is that Ursula, who came to the room, had prepared a witness statement. And she says she was walking on the floor. This is the one who heard the thud. And she thinks it was after lunch. She was in the second room. She heard a loud thump, and then she goes on about how she helps Ms. Thomas up. et cetera, and takes her to the nurse's station. What's interesting in this case is that Ms. Thomas says that she told Ms. Thomas says that she told Ursula, who prepared the statement, that she tripped on the call cord. Nowhere in that statement is there any mention at all of the fact that Ms. Thomas tripped on the call cord. And it's a 3-page statement. I'm not going to go through all of it right now because it's just basically talking about, what happened and helping her, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, it's completely silent about any mention of tripping on the call cord. That, of course, helps us, but part of the statement can help her as well. And just one final point, I think it would have helped too, again, had I been involved at the outset, in addition to helping the employer make sure they have all the right information on the witness statements, is to take a picture immediately afterwards. That's something that I strongly encourage employers to do, to capture the scene as it was at the time. That is so critical. In this case, it might have made the difference. If we see that the call cord appeared as it did in the initial picture, it wasn't pulled out, it was against the wall, that could sometimes turn the case around. So there are, again, ways to have saved this case. I think from the employer's standpoint, would have made the difference in the end. I don't know, but I think we could have certainly put on a stronger case. Let me just give it to Mr. Barker. Okay.
I think Steve did most of the talking to get back at me after the last 17 years because I get to do most of the talking when we meet in the hearing room. I guess I don't have too much to add at this point. A couple of things. The average hearing in my hearing room was 15 minutes. They're informal legal proceedings. This was much more formal than something you'd see. From my point of view, the hardest thing for me to do is put the story together, like Steve said. We often don't have all the information. I'm often the person who has to ask who your family doctor is. Have you ever treated for a knee problem before? And if the answer is yes, I have to take them at their word that it was a year ago, 6 years ago, 3 months ago. And I have to make my decision without those medical records, and hopefully the parties will get them for the next hearing. So from my point of view, the hardest thing I have to do is make a decision on incomplete medical records. So that's my personal pet peeve. As far as the facts of this case, the one or two things I'd add that Steve didn't point out, and since I haven't seen the medical records, the questions that I'd ask pertain mostly to them. A direct fall on the knee isn't the usual mechanism of injury for meniscus tear. Usually it's a twisting injury. The emergency room record talked about the tibial plateau fracture, but that seems to have gone away. They weren't requesting that at the end. Dr. Kellis was just talking about the meniscal tear. So I'd ask what happened with that. I'd want to see the x-rays to see if they were talking about any arthritic conditions on x-ray. I'm not sure, in my mind, just based on the limited knowledge of what I've been told, that the bruising was a big deal, and the fact that it wasn't mentioned on x-rays. Both parties acknowledged that the bruising was there and seemed to be consistent as to the story of why at least some of the bruising was there. So the fact that the emergency room didn't note it is obviously a mistake on the emergency rooms department. I tend to hear that a lot, that the emergency room department missed something. Sometimes that's more important than others. If the emergency room department allegedly missed something and there's a follow-up with another doctor a day or two later and that doctor notes swelling or makes a diagnosis in a similar area, I can find it more easy to overlook the emergency room record. If there's a gap in treatment of a month, 2 months, 3 months, and suddenly another body part pops up, obviously that's more problematic from my point of view. So based on the limited documentation I saw, those would be the questions that would pop up in my mind.